The first entry is dated August 2006. Corridor Capacity Reduction Monitor. Wrote it in the same logbook I had been keeping since the impoundment was complete. Same format my supervisor used at the State Water Authority when I was a junior. Engineer in 1966. Date, measurement, observation, permanent ink. You write what you see. You write it clearly. You do not write what you conclude. You write what the instrument shows and let the record speak. The record is needed. I designed the lake myself, filed the hydraulic analysis myself, built the dam in the summer of 1979, and watched the first fill season run through. April 1980. The permit authorized a maximum discharge of 9.4 cubic feet per second through the southern corridor, a figure I calculated from the corridor's natural geometry, measured and submitted with a 3-page supporting analysis. In 2006, a developer built 240 residential units to my south. Their crew graded the western corridor. I measured the cross-section compression from the ridge with a theodolite, walked it again with a tape, and wrote the numbers down. Corridor Capacity Reduction Monitor. 18 years later, a licensed hydrologist measured the same corridor. Current. Practical capacity, 2.7 cubic feet per second. Permitted maximum discharge from my spillway. 9.4. I submitted the Water Authority notification Monday at 9:15 a.m. Discharge date: Wednesday. Start time: 7 a.m. Rate: 9.4 CFS. Duration. The inspector confirmed the permit current and within authorization at 9:45 a.m. He was parked on the county road shoulder by noon. Field notebook open, recording corridor elevation readings. At 30-minute intervals, he was still there when the HOA called emergency services at 2:45. The dispatcher routed the call to him directly, he told them. Permitted discharge. Authorized parameters. No water authority violation. No applicable emergency action under state permit law. I opened the gate at 7:02 a.m. I closed it at 9 p.m. 14 hours, exactly as filed. I wrote the closing time in the logbook, noted the gate position sealed, and walked back up the north ridge to the farmhouse. The lake had always been mine. I simply kept the records to prove it. Real quick before we start, where are you watching from? Hit like, hit subscribe, and let's get into this story. The bull had been there longer than anyone in the Voss family had owned the land. It sat at the southern end of the 680-acre parcel, a natural depression where the terrain dropped away from the timber ridge in a long, gradual slope, and then fell more sharply into a basin roughly a quarter-mile across, fed by 3 seasonal drainages that came off the ridge from the east, the northeast, and the north. In wet years, the basin held standing water from February through May. In dry years, it held mud and red grass, and the particular silence of a place that is shaped for water and waiting for it. Harlan's father had walked down into it twice that. He could recall once to retrieve a steer that had gotten into the cattails, once to look at the outlet drainage after a hard March rain, and had concluded that it was not useful land. He had run cattle on the upland sections, cut timber from the eastern ridge on a sustainable rotation, and left the bowl to do what it had always done: collect water and release it slowly through the natural corridor that ran south toward the county road. The Voss family had acquired the 680 acres in the summer of 1947, when Harlan was 4 years old, and the transaction was his father's business entirely. The deed was a straightforward conveyance, fie simple. No reservations, no easements, no conditions on use. The parcel boundary ran along 2 county roads on its northern and western edges, along a surveyed line on the east, and along the top of a low drainage divide on the south that separated the Voss property from the farmland below. The bowl and its drainage corridor fell entirely within that boundary. They had always fallen entirely within that boundary. This was not a complicated fact. It was the kind of fact that a deed makes plain in 2 sentences, and that requires no further argument once the document is in hand. Harlan had grown up on the property and left it for the first time at 18 to study civil engineering at the State University. He completed a graduate specialization in hydraulics. joined the State Water Authority as a junior engineer in 1966, and spent the next 13 years doing the work that water engineers do, assessing drainage systems, reviewing permit applications, writing capacity analyses for impoundments and diversion structures across the state's agricultural and timber districts. He was good at the work in the specific way that people are good at things they find genuinely interesting, not just technically competent, but curious. The kind of engineer who walked a drainage corridor twice before writing a single number, who kept field notes in a bound logbook rather than on loose paper, because loose paper disappeared and logbooks did not. His supervisors described him in annual reviews as thorough and conservative, which in hydraulic engineering is the highest. Practical compliment. He came back to the property in the summers, and every summer he walked the bowl. He walked it the way an engineer walks a site, not for pleasure, though there was pleasure in it, but with the specific attention of someone reading a system and understanding what it could do. The 3 drainages off the ridge delivered an average of 14 acre-feet of seasonal inflow per year. Based on measurements he had been making informally since his mid-20s, the natural outlet corridor had a gradient of approximately 1.8% over its 800-foot length to the county road, sufficient to move water reliably, but not so steep as to cause erosive velocity under normal flow conditions. The basin's storage capacity, by his rough survey calculations, was somewhere between 25 and 35 acres at a depth of 15 to 20 feet. It was, in his professional assessment, a natural impoundment site. His father had seen unusable land. Harlan saw a lake that had not yet been built. He began the permitting process in the spring of 1977, the State Water Authority's impoundment. The permit program required a full hydraulic analysis, a site survey, an environmental assessment, a downstream drainage impact study, and a public comment period. Harlan submitted all of it himself, not as a shortcut, but because he was a State Water Authority engineer, and he understood the process from the inside and saw no reason to pay someone else to do work he was more qualified to do, he recused himself from the internal review as procedure required and let the application move through the normal sequence. 2 years was the standard timeline for a private impoundment of this size. The permit, WA 1979221, was issued in March 1979. He kept a copy of the permit in a fireproof box in the farmhouse, and a second copy in a manila folder in his filing system, behind the tab labeled Lake Water Rights. The permit authorized the construction of a controlled impoundment on the Voss parcel at the coordinates of the natural bowl, the maximum surface area of 35 acres, the maximum depth of 25 feet at the dam face, and a controlled spillway discharging into the existing natural drainage corridor at the southern end of the basin. The maximum authorized release rate was 9.4 cubic feet per second, a figure Harlan had calculated based on the corridor's natural capacity at its pre-development condition and had submitted with a 3-page supporting analysis. The permit required 48-hour notification to the State Water Authority before any control deed release exceeding 2.0 CFS. It required no notification to adjacent property owners, because there were no adjacent structures within the corridor's flood influence zone at the time of the application. The land to the south was farmland. The county road was 800 feet from the spillway. There was nothing between them but the corridor, and the reed grass dock construction began in the summer of 1979. Harlan had retired from the State Water Authority the previous December, 23 years of service. A desk full of completed permit files and a property in the south part of the state that needed a dam built. He contracted the earthwork to a local firm but supervised every phase himself, running his own elevation checks against the permitted grade specifications, verifying the spillway structure's dimensions before the concrete was poured, inspecting the dam face compaction and 3-foot lifts. The impoundment was complete by November of that year, ahead of the first significant rain season. He opened the inlet valves at December and watched the water begin. The first fill season ran through the following spring. By April 1980, the lake had reached 60% of its design capacity. By the end of the second fill season, it was full, 31 acres of water surface, 22 feet deep at the dam face, the 3 ridge drainages now feeding into a basin that held their combined seasonal contribution and released it in a controlled, measured flow through the spillway at whatever rate Harlan set. He had made his first logbook entry on the day the water first reached the spillway crest. April 14, 1980. Lake at design level. Spillway nominal. Inflow from east drainage confirmed at 0.4 CFS. He had made an entry for every significant event since every substantial rain. Every release adjustment, every measurement of the corridor flow at the county road culvert, 800 feet south. 46 years of entries in a series of bound logbooks that occupied 2 shelves in the farmhouse's second bedroom. Organized by year, the spines labeled in Harlan's hand. The lake changed the property, not dramatically. Harlan had not built it for drama, but he had built it for water management, reliable stock water for the cattle operation, fire suppression capacity for the timber sections, and the simple engineering. Satisfaction of having built a system that worked correctly from the first fill season and had continued to work correctly for 46 years. The spillway had operated within its design parameters in every wet year, every drought, every weather event the property had encountered since 1980. The logbooks documented all of it. The logbooks documented the lake the way a pilot's log documents a flight record, not as narrative, but as data.
Ow.
The kind of record that means nothing until someone needs to know exactly what happened on a specific date at a specific flow rate, and then means everything. The deed boundary enclosed the entire lake bed. This was not an accident. Harlan had confirmed the boundary's relationship to the bowl's maximum. Fill elevation before he filed the permit application, he had walked the high water line, shot elevations from the existing survey monuments, and verified that the lake, at design capacity, would remain inside the parcel boundary with a minimum setback of 40 feet at every point. The permit application had included a boundary confirmation exhibit showing this relationship explicitly. The deed said what the deed, he said. The lake was inside it. He had been managing it alone since his wife passed in 2011. Their daughter, Ruth, had grown up on the property and had her own relationship with the lake. She had learned to swim in it at 8 years old. Had caught her first fish in it at 10, had written her law school personal statement in the farmhouse the summer before she enrolled, looking south at the water from the kitchen window. She was an environmental attorney now, based in the state capital, specializing in water rights and wetland law. She called her father every Sunday evening and visited 4 or 5 times a year. The calls followed a pattern. She asked about the cattle, the timber, the weather, the lake level, and whether he was eating properly. He answered all 4 questions honestly and asked about her cases. The conversations lasted between 12 and 25 minutes and were, in Harlan's assessment, the best part of most Sundays. She called on a Sunday evening in the second week of the month, 2 weeks before the letter arrived. The call ran its usual course: cattle, timber, weather, lake level. He told her the level was nominal. Spring inflow had been slightly above the 10-year average. The spillway was cycling, normally at its passive, were rate of about 0.3 CFS. She said that sounded right. Then, before he changed the subject, he mentioned the dock situation the way a man mentions something that has been in his peripheral vision. It's long enough that it comes out without specific intention. Not as a complaint, not as an alarm, just as a fact he had been carrying and happened to set down. He said the HOA down the south end had added a second kayak rack to their launch platform. He had seen it from the ridge that morning. Said they had also repainted the dock. He said the dock was on his property, as it had always been, and the launch platform was on his property, as it had always been, and the swim buoys marking their roped area were anchored in his lake bed, as they had always been. He said he had told them so in 2006 and again in 2008, and nothing had changed. Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she asked if he had heard anything from the board recently. He said not yet, but he had a feeling. She said she would drive up the following month to look at the files. He said that was fine. He told her the guest room was made up. She said she knew it was always made up. He said goodnight. He set the phone on the kitchen table and looked south through the window at the lake. The surface flat and dark in the evening, the spillway running its quiet, passive discharge into the corridor below. The dock was visible at the eastern shore, even in this light, a darker line against the water. 40 feet of fixed pier sitting on Harlan's private lake bed without a recorded instrument, without a lease, without a single document authorizing its presence. It had been there for 16 years. He opened his logbook to the current page and wrote the date and the lake level and the passive discharge rate and one additional line. Ruth call, Doc noted. Filed under observation. Then he closed the logbook and went to bed. The letter was 2 weeks away. The Lakeview Terrace development permit was filed with the county in January 2006, and Harlan knew about it before the first piece of equipment arrived on site. He had seen the notice in the county's weekly permit digest. He subscribed to it the way farmers subscribe to weather reports. Not because every entry was relevant, but because the relevant ones mattered enough to justify reading all the others. The parcel being developed was the farmland south of his property. 340 acres of former row crop ground that had been sold out of the Metcalf family estate the previous year. He had known the Metcalf land his entire life. He knew its drainage. He knew how it sat relative to his corridor. He drove the boundary road the week the permit was posted and looked at the site plan drawings displayed on the county's public notice board outside the permit office. The development proposed 240 units in a mixed cabin and cottage configuration, with the 80 units fronting the eastern edge of the site, positioned to face north toward the Voss property. The site plan included a notation in the upper right corner of the drainage sheet, printed in a font smaller than the rest of the document, that Harlan read twice to be certain he had read it correctly. Adjacent recreational water feature. Public access pending county park dedication, Voss Lake. He read the parcel boundary line on the same sheet. The boundary line placed the lake entirely within the Voss deed. The notation described a park dedication that had not happened. He wrote the permit number in his logbook that evening and drove home. Construction began in the spring of 2006. Harlan watched it from the North Ridge with a pair of field binoculars he kept on the porch for exactly this kind. The same binoculars he used to check the spillway condition during high water events. The same ones his daughter had used as a child to watch the herons that worked the eastern shallows in the evening. What he watched that spring and summer was not the cabin framing or the road grading or the utility trenching, though all of that was visible from the ridge. What he watched was the drainage. The developer's crew graded the site in 2 phases. The first phase established the road network and cabin pad elevations, which required moving significant volumes of soil from the site's higher western margin toward its lower eastern section. This was standard practice for a sloped development site and unremarkable in itself. The second phase was what Harlan watched most carefully, the grading along the western boundary, where the site's drainage had historically sheeted toward the natural corridor that ran along the property line before continuing south toward the county road. The developer's crew cut a new swale along the western boundary road, redirecting to minor surface drainages that had previously dispersed across the site's upper section into a concentrated outfall at the corridor's northern entry point. They also graded the western boundary itself, a long, shallow cut that reduced the corridor's cross-section at the property line by compressing its eastern bank inward by approximately 8 feet. Harlan measured the compression from the ridge. Using his survey instrument, an old theodolite he kept calibrated out of habit, and confirmed it against the pre-construction aerial photographs he had pulled from the county assessor's archive. The corridor's natural width at the western boundary had been approximately 28 feet. After the developers grading it, was approximately 20 feet at the narrowest point, with the bank slope altered from its natural angle to a steeper, less stable profile. He wrote the measurements in his logbook on a Tuesday evening in August 2006, added the developer's permit number beside the entry, and wrote one sentence below the measurements. Corridor capacity reduction monitor. He did not file a complaint. He was not required to. The grading was within the developer's permitted site work. The capacity reduction, while hydraulically significant to anyone who understood the numbers, was not a violation of any ordinance that Harlan could cite at that time. It was documenting, not litigating. It spent 23 years at the State Water Authority watching situations develop slowly, and reach a critical point long after the initial conditions were established. He knew the difference between the moment when something happens and the moment when it matters. He wrote it in the logbook and continued monitoring. He wrote his first letter to the developer in September 2006, 3 months after the site plans. Park dedication notation had appeared in the public record without a corresponding dedication filing. He had checked the county records in June, July, and August. No dedication. He wrote to the developer's project manager, a company called Ridgeline Development Group, operating address in the county seat, and stated 4 things in plain language. Voss Lake was private property under deed and water permit, WA 1979-221. The lake was not a public recreational feature and had never been dedicated to public use. No access right of any kind had been granted to the development or its future residents. And the park dedication notation in the site plan did not create a property right and would not become one by virtue of its continued presence in a county permit file. Requested written acknowledgement that the notation would be corrected or withdrawn. The response came 3 weeks. Later on, Ridgeline letterhead. It cited the county park dedication language in the site plan, stated that the company was pursuing the dedication process in coordination with the county parks department, and assured Harlan that the matter would be resolved through proper channels before the development opened. Harlan checked the county records the week after receiving the letter. No dedication process had been initiated with the county parks department. He filed the response behind his letter in the lake folder and wrote in his logbook, "Developer response. Received. Dedication process claimed, not confirmed by county record. Continue monitoring, the cabins sold quickly." Lakeview Terrace opened in late 2007, and by the spring of 2008, all 80 lakefront units were occupied. The marketing materials that had accompanied each cabin sale included a rendering of Voss Lake as seen from the eastern shore, the water blue, and still, with a notation at the bottom of the page, lake access included with lakefront cabin purchase. Harlan had obtained one of these marketing packets from a county real estate office in early 2008 when the Lakeview Terrace development did not appear without warning. Harlan had watched its approach the way a man watches weather moving across open country, not with alarm, but with the steady attention of someone who understands what weather does when it arrives. The land to the south and east of the Voss property had been agricultural for as long as he could remember, a mix of row crop fields and pasture, belonging to 2 families whose names he had known since boyhood, when the first survey stakes appeared in the spring of 2005. He noted them from the North Ridge with his field glasses, identified the staking pattern as a subdivision layout, wrote 1 line in his logbook, "Development survey, south parcel." Monitored drainage implications. He had spent 13 years at the State Water Authority reviewing permit applications for exactly this kind of project. He knew what subdivision development did to drainage in a bowl-fed watershed. It increased impervious surface, accelerated runoff timing, compressed natural corridors, and redirected minor drainages in ways that looked orderly on a site plan and created problems that took years to fully manifest. He was not opposed to the development. As a matter of principle, he was attentive to it as a matter of hydraulics. The drainage corridor that ran south from his spillway through the natural depression toward the county road was the only outlet for his lakes-controlled releases. Whatever happened to that corridor, whatever the developer chose to do with, the land it crossed had direct implications for the permitted operation of his impoundment. He intended to know exactly what they were doing and exactly what it meant before anyone asked him about it. The developer filed the Lakeview Terrace site plan with the county in January 2006. Harlan drove to the county planning office the week it became available for public review and spent 2 hours with the document at the public counter. The site plan showed 240 units arranged in 3 tiers along the eastern and southern portions of the parcel, with 80 of those units the lakefront cabins sited along the eastern shore of what the plan labeled adjacent recreational water. Feature public access pending county park dedication. Voss Lake, rendered in light blue on the plan's site map, was shown as though it were a common amenity sitting at the edge of the development. The deed line was on the plan. It ran along the eastern shore, inside which the dock and recreation areas were later proposed. but the plan's labeling made no reference to private ownership. It presented the lake as a feature of the project. Rather than as someone else's property, Harlan read the park dedication language twice. He knew what a park dedication required: a formal instrument of dedication signed by the property owner, acceptance by the county or municipal authority, and recording in the county's official records. He was the property owner. He had not signed any dedication instrument. He had not been contacted about any dedication instrument. He drove from the planning office to the county recorder's office the same afternoon and checked the index for any dedication filing on his parcel. There was none. He checked again under the developer's name. There was none under that name either. The park dedication language in the site plan was a notation about an event that had not occurred and, as far as the county record was concerned, did not exist. He wrote the developer a letter that week. It was 3 paragraphs. The first stated that Voss Lake was private property under his deed and water permit, WA 1979-221, both of which were recorded instruments. Second stated that no dedication of the lake or its shoreline had been filed or accepted, and that no access right of any kind had been granted to the developer or to any future property owner in the proposed development. The third stated that he was putting this on the record for the developer's information and expected the site plan's lake labeling to be corrected before the county issued a building permit. He mailed it certified and kept the receipt. The developer's response arrived 2 weeks later. It was a single paragraph on company letterhead signed by a project manager whose name Harlan did not recognize. It said the site plan accurately reflected the proposed park dedication that the company intended to file with the county prior to the development's opening date, and that the lake's designation as a community amenity was consistent with the project's approved plan. It cited the county permit number. It said nothing about Harlan's deed or his water permit or the fact that no dedication had been filed. Harlan checked the county record again the week the response arrived. Yes, no dedication. He wrote the date in his logbook, noted the developer's response, and added one line: dedication claim unsupported by county record. File maintained, construction proceeded through. 2006, Harlan watched the grading from the ridge through the summer months, field glasses in hand on most mornings' logbook open on the tailgate of his truck. The developer's crew worked the southern and eastern portions of the site with the aggressive efficiency of a project on a compressed schedule, clearing, grading, compacting, laying utilities, pouring foundations. On 3 separate occasions, in July and August, Harlan watched heavy equipment work the land adjacent to the drainage corridor along the western boundary of the site. They were not building on the corridor; it fell outside the development's footprint, but they were grading the land beside it. And the grading altered the corridor's relationship to the surrounding terrain in a way that a hydraulic engineer could see clearly and that a site plan reviewer working from drawings would not necessarily catch. The corridor's natural cross-section relied on the adjacent land to hold its banks at grade. The developer's grading cut into the land on the corridor's eastern side, reducing the effective bank height and compressing the corridor's functional width at its narrowest point from approximately 14 feet to somewhere between 10 and 11 feet. It was not a dramatic change. On a site plan, it was invisible in the field. To a man who had measured the corridor's natural dimensions and submitted those measurements to the State Water Authority as part of his permit application, was a reduction that mattered not catastrophically under normal operating conditions, but significantly under any condition that pushed the corridor toward its capacity limits. He wrote the developer's county permit number in his logbook that August, below his measurements of the altered cross-section. Then he wrote, corridor capacity reduction. Monitor. The development opened in the spring of 2007, the 80 lakefront. Cabins sold quickly. The marketing materials had featured the lake prominently. Photographs of the eastern shore at sunrise. The water still and reflective under the tree canopy. The language consistently describing lake access as a defining feature of the community. Buyers paid a premium for the lakefront units. The HOA was established in 2007 with a board drawn from the initial residents. And by the summer of 2008, the board had approved a dock installation project, a 40-foot fixed pier extending from the eastern shore out into the water to docks. Building permit was filed with the county in March 2008. Harlan checked the permit application the week it appeared in the public index. The application described the dock site as HOA common area and listed the property address as the Lakeview Terrace development address. It did not reference the VOS deed. It did not reference water permit WA 1979221. It did not include any documentation of an access right or ownership interest in the lake bed. The county issued the building permit in April. The dock was installed in June, extending 40 feet from the eastern shore into water that was Harlan's by deed and by permit and by 46 years of continuous documented ownership, Harlan wrote. The HOA a letter in July 2008. It was structured the same way as his 2006 letter to the developer. 3 paragraphs, plain language, certified mail. The first stated that the dock had been installed on his private property without his consent, and without a recorded access right. The second stated that the water permit WAA 1979221 vested management and control of the lake in him as the permit holder, and that no structure could be placed in the impoundment without his authorization. The third stated that he expected the board to respond in writing with either a recorded instrument establishing their access right or an acknowledgement that no such right existed and a timeline for dock removal. The HOA's response arrived. 3 weeks later, it cited the county park dedication language from the 2006 site plan. It said the lake had been designated a community amenity in the approved development plan and that the dock was consistent with that designation.
Oh, really?
It did not attach a recorded dedication instrument because no recorded dedication instrument existed. Harlan checked the county record the same week. Still no dedication. He noted the HOA's response in his logbook, filed the certified mail receipt, and wrote, "Dedication claim repeated. County record unchanged. Position maintained." The swimming area buoys went in the summer of 2009, anchored in his lake bed. The kayak launch platform was installed in the spring of 2011, bolted to the eastern shoreline within his deed boundary. The HOA began collecting a $200 annual lake access fee from all 240 units starting in the fall of 2009, $48,000 per year, generated by access to water Harlan owned, collected without his consent, without compensation to him, without any legal instrument authorizing the arrangement. He noted each addition in his logbook. He did not write to the HOA again after 2008, not because his position had changed, but because the record of his objection was already established, and repeating it without new legal action would not alter the situation. He was waiting for the moment when the situation required something more than a letter. Cora Fielding moved into one of the lakefront cabins in 2012 and joined the HOA board in 2015. She became board president in 2018 after running on a platform of protecting property values and defending community amenities. She was organized, confident, accustomed to managing complex transactions. Her commercial real estate background had given her facility with contracts, timelines, and the particular skill of moving a project forward before anyone had time to raise objections. She had reviewed the HOA's governing documents thoroughly when she joined the board. She had reviewed the development's CC&RS, the bylaws, the fee schedule, the landscaping standards, and the enforcement procedures. She had not reviewed the county recorder's file on the lake. She had not looked up the VOS deed. She had not pulled water permit WA 1979-221. The site plan said public access pending park dedication. The board had been operating on that basis for 10 years. Cora continued operating on that basis. The letter arrived at Harlan's farmhouse on a Tuesday in the second week of April, delivered certified, signed for at the door. He carried it to the kitchen table, set it flat, and opened it. It was on HOA letterhead, signed by Cora Fielding as board president and by Iris Tomboli as a board member below her. 2 signatures. He looked at the signature block first. As he always did with formal correspondence, he had been a government engineer long enough to know that who signed a document mattered as much as what it said. He read the letter once. Slowly, it was 3 paragraphs. The first described the board's ongoing commitment to maintaining community amenities and improving recreational access for Lakeview Terrace residents. The second stated the board's specific demands. Harlan was required to lower Voss Lake's water level by 3 feet from its current elevation to improve shoreline access for cabin residents, and to install a secondary boat launch ramp on the lake's north shore at his own expense within 60 days. The third cited the HOA's established recreational rights over the lake as the basis for these demands, and stated that failure to comply would require the board to pursue enforcement action to protect the community's access interests. Established recreational rights. He read the phrase twice. Then he looked at the bottom of the letter for a citation, a recorded instrument number, an easement reference, a deed exhibit. There was nothing. The phrase stood alone, unsupported, 3 words asserting a legal status that had no corresponding document in the county record. He set the letter on the table beside his coffee cup and looked at it for a long moment. He picked up his phone and called Ruth. She answered on the second ring. He said, "The letter arrived." She asked what it said. He read her the demand paragraph: lower the lake 3 feet, install a ramp, 60 days, established recreational rights. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Does she cite a recorded instrument?" He said no. Ruth said she would drive up Saturday. He said the guest room was made up. He set the phone down and opened his logbook to a new page. He wrote the date, the letter's key demands, and the signature block. Then he wrote, "No recorded instrument. Cited county record status, unchanged. Ruth arriving Saturday. Legal review to follow." He closed the logbook and looked south through the kitchen window at the lake. The dock was visible at the eastern shore, the swim buoys bobbing at the edge of the roped area, the kayak launch platform, sitting on his shoreline in the morning light. 16 years of installation, 16 years of access fees, 16 years of use without a single recorded instrument authorizing any of it. And now, a letter demanding that he lower the water level and build them a ramp at his own expense, citing rights that existed nowhere in the county record. He finished his coffee. Saturday was 4 days away. Ruth arrived Saturday morning at 9:15, driving the 2-hour route from the state capitol in the same practical sedan she had driven for 6 years, a travel mug of coffee in the Q folder, and a notepad on the passenger seat. She had been making this drive her entire adult life, first from college, then from law school, then from the succession of offices and apartments that had preceded the one she occupied now. And she knew its landmarks the way you know things. You have passed so many times that they register below the level of conscious attention. The county road intersection at the base of the ridge, the timber stand on the eastern slope where the property began, the farmhouse visible from the road. As she turned onto the gravel drive, the north-facing porch catching the morning light, Harlan met her at the door with coffee already poured. They sat at the kitchen table for 20 minutes without discussing the letter. She asked about the cattle, the spring inflow numbers, the eastern drainage that had been running slightly high in March. He answered all 3 questions. Then she set her notepad on the table and said, "Show me the files." He took her to the second bedroom. The filing system occupied 2 cabinets against the north wall, 4 drawers each, the contents organized by category and year in a system that Harlan had maintained without deviation since he retired in 1979. Ruth had grown up watching him file things, receipts, permit copies, correspondence, survey records with the same discipline he applied to everything else on the property. She had found it mildly excessive as a child, and had come through her years of legal practice to understand it as the single most professionally useful habit a person could have. The file was always there. The document was always where it was supposed to be. When you needed to know what had happened on a specific date, you opened the correct drawer, and it told you. The lake folder was in the second drawer of the left cabinet. Behind the tab marked Lake Water Rights, Harlan pulled it and set it. On the small table beside the filing cabinets, Ruth opened it and began reading from the front. Water Permit WA 1979221. First, the original state-issued document. 5 pages. The permit holder identified as Harlan James Voss. The parcel described by its deed coordinates. The impoundment authorized at the specified dimensions. The maximum release rate stated as 9.4 cubic feet per second. The 48-hour notification. Requirement for controlled releases above 2.0 CFS, printed in the standard permit language on page 3. Ruth read the release rate figure and wrote it on her notepad. She read the notification requirements and wrote those too. She set the permit down and picked up the deed. The deed was a standard fee simple conveyance. The parcel boundary described in metes and bounds across 3 pages. Ruth read the boundary description with the attention of someone who knew how to read one. She had reviewed enough easement disputes in her practice to parse a legal description quickly and identify the relationship between the described boundary and the physical features it referenced. The bowl that contained the lake sat entirely within the described boundary. The high water line of the lake at its permitted maximum elevation fell inside the parcel line at every point by a minimum of 40 feet. The lake bed was Harlan's. The shoreline was Harlan's. The eastern shore, where the dock had been installed, where the swim buoys were anchored, where the kayak launch platform sat, was Harlan's. The deed said so in the unambiguous language of a meets and bounds description that had been recorded in the county record since 1947. She set the deed beside the permit and picked up Harlan's 2006 letter to the developer, the first one. Sent. Certified in September of that year, she read it carefully. 3 paragraphs, plain language, the key points stated without embellishment. Private property, no access right granted. Park dedication notation does not create a property right. Written acknowledgement requested. She read the developer's response. She read the second check of the county record that Harlan had documented in his logbook entry. She read the 2008 letter to the HOA. She read the HOA's response, which cited the same park dedication language the developer had cited, attached to the same absence of a recorded instrument. She read the building permit for the dock pulled from the county's files by Harlan in 2008, the permit that the county had issued without verifying the applicant's ownership, interest in the lake bed. By the time she had worked through the full folder, it was past noon. She came back to the kitchen table and sat across from Harlan, with her notepad open and 3 pages of organized notes in front of her. She said, "You have the deed, the water permit, 2 letters of objection on record, the developer's own site, plan showing your deed line along the eastern shore, and the county record confirmation that no park dedication was ever filed." She said, "The HOAS dock, swimming area, and kayak launch are sitting on your private property without a single recorded instrument authorizing their presence." She said, "The demand letter cites established recreational rights that do not exist anywhere in the county record." Harlan said he knew. Ruth said she needed to call Owen Streck. Owen had been in state water law for 24 years, the first aide as staff counsel for the State Water Authority before he entered private practice. Ruth had worked opposite him in 2 water rights matters and had referred clients to him in 3 others. He was methodical, thorough, and specifically expert in the intersection of water permits, private impoundment rights, and the downstream liability questions that arose when those rights were disputed. He was also, which mattered in a case with this much documented history, someone who read a file completely before forming a position. She called him from the kitchen table at 12-40. She gave him the summary in 7 minutes. 680-acre parcel. 1979 private impoundment. Water permit WA 1979 to 221. Maximum release 9.4 CFS. Lake entirely within deed boundary. 240-unit development built adjacent in 2006. Developer site plan cited pending park dedication that was never filed. HOA installed dock in 2008. Swimming area in 2009. Kayak launch in 2011. $200 annual access fee from 240 units since 2009. Now a demand letter requiring a 3-foot lake level reduction and a new launch ramp. Fighting established recreational rights with no recorded instrument cited or attached. Owen was quiet for a moment. Then he said he would pull the full development record from the county and state files and call back by the end of the following week. He asked her to scan and send the folder contents that afternoon. She said she would. He asked one additional question. Was the developer still operating as the original entity, or had there been a reorganization? Ruth looked at Harlan. Harlan, said Ridgeline Development. Group had been dissolved in 2011 and its assets transferred to a successor LLC. He had the dissolution filing in the third drawer. Behind the 2011 tab, Ruth relayed this to Owen. Owen said to include that document in the scan. Ruth said she would. She spent the afternoon at Harlan's kitchen table with his flatbed scanner. Working through the folder systematically, every document, both sides where relevant, in the order they appeared in the file. Harlan sat at the other end of the table, reading the weekly farm management report he generated every Saturday from his livestock and timber records. They worked in the same room in the specific companionable quiet of two people who have been in each other's company long enough that silence does not require filling. Owen called the following. Thursday at 4 in the afternoon. Harlan and Ruth were on speaker at the kitchen table. Owen had spent the week pulling records from three sources. It's the county recorder's office, the county planning department's permit archive, and the State Water Authority's permit database. Findings were organized, and his delivery was the unhurried precision of a man who has reviewed a complete record, is reporting what it says rather than arguing for a conclusion. The lake was entirely within Harlan's deed boundary, the developer's own 2006 site plan. The document filed with the county and stamped as the approved site plan for the Lakeview Terrace. Development showed the Voss deed line running along the eastern shore of the lake. The deed line was on the developer's own drawing. The dock, installed in 2008, extended from a point on the eastern shore that sat inside that deed line. The swimming area's anchor points were in the lake bed. The kayak launch platform was bolted to the shoreline inside the deed boundary. 3 structures had been installed on Harlan's private property, not adjacent to it, not near it, on it. The park dedication language in the site plan was a developer's annotation, a notation of intent, not a recorded instrument. Owen had checked the county's park dedication acceptance records, the County Parks Department's filing index, and the state's recreational land registry. No dedication filing existed for the Voss Lake shoreline or lake bed under any of the relevant categories. The county had never processed a dedication for this land. The county had never accepted one. The notation in the site plan had described an event that the developer had intended to pursue and had not pursued. In the absence of the recorded instrument meant that no access right had ever been created. Harlan's 3 letters of objection, minus 2006 second letter. 2008 established continuous owner objection throughout the period. An adverse possession claim, if the HOA ever tried to raise one, would fail on the objection record alone. Water permit WA 1979 to 221 was current. Owen had verified its status with the State Water Authority that morning. The permit had been renewed on schedule at every 5-year renewal interval since. Its issuance in 1979, it was in full compliance. Its terms had not changed. Maximum release. Rate 9.4 CFS. 48-hour notification to the State Water Authority for controlled releases above 2.0 CFS. No notification required to adjacent property owners. The permit granted Harlan complete operational control of release rates within the permitted parameters. The demand that he lower the lake level by 3 feet was a demand that he altered the management of a permitted water facility. A demand the HOA had no legal standing to make. Then, Owen described the hydraulic study. He had pulled the developer's 2006 hydraulic study from the County Planning Department's permit archive, a standard drainage analysis submitted as part of the site plan approval package. The study addressed the drainage corridor along the development's western boundary, which was the same corridor that received discharge from Harlan Spillway. The study's stated design capacity for the corridor was 3.1 cubic feet per second. Owen read the number twice. He said, the maximum authorized release from Harlan Spillway under permit, WA 1979 to 221, is 9.4 cubic feet per second. The developer's own hydraulic study rated the corridor at 3.1. The ratio was 3.03 to 1. He paused to let that number settle. He said his recommendation was threefold. First, send a single certified response to the HOA, denying the demand and asserting ownership, plain language, no legal threats. the facts, and the recorded instruments. Second, hold the water permit response in reserve. Do not reference the spillway capacity or the corridor analysis in the certified letter. Let the HOA act on the demand denial and see what they do next. Third, retain a licensed hydrologist to produce a current hydraulic analysis of the corridor before taking any further action. The developer's 2006 study was 18 years old. The corridor had been altered by the developer's grading. Current conditions needed to be documented by an independent professional before anyone could speak authoritatively about what full discharge would do to the western boundary of Lakeview Terrace. He said he had a hydrologist in mind, Nora Aldis's. State certified, 22 years of field experience. Someone whose sealed reports had been accepted in every state court and administrative proceeding. Owen had brought them too. He said he would call her Monday. Ruth asked what the corridor analysis was for, specifically what they expected it to show. Owen said he expected it to show that the developer's 2006 grading had reduced the corridor's current practical capacity below the already inadequate 3.1 CFS figure, which would mean that full discharge under Harlan's permit rights would deliver significantly more flow to the Lakeview Terrace western boundary than the development's drainage infrastructure had been designed to handle. He said he was not recommending any action on that basis yet. He was recommending that the data exist, documented by a licensed professional with a sealed report. Before it was needed, Harlan said he understood. Owen asked if Harlan had any questions. Harlan said no. He said the recommendation was correct and he would follow it. After they hung up, Ruth sat at the kitchen table and looked at her notepad. 3 pages of organized notes, the discharge figure and the corridor capacity circled on the second page, 9.4 CFS versus 3.1 CFS. She looked at her father, who was already opening his logbook to a new entry. She said, "Did you know those numbers before today?" Said he had estimated them. He said the logbook entry from 2006, corridor capacity reduction. Monitor had been based on his field observations of the developer's grading. He said he had not known the developer's own study figure until Owen read it to them, but that the order of magnitude was consistent with what he had estimated. From the ridge in the summer of 2006, Ruth said, "You've been monitoring this for 18 years, Harlan said. Hey, that's what monitoring means." He wrote the data in the logbook. Owen's key findings in point form, and the corridor capacity figures side by side. Developer study 2006. 3.1 CFS permit. Maximum 9.4 CFS. Ratio 3.03 to 1. Nora Aldis is engaged for current assessment. Certified response to HOA pending. Then he closed the logbook and looked south through the kitchen window at the lake, the dock, the swim buoys, the kayak launch platform. 16 years of infrastructure on his private property, built on the basis of a dedication that had never been filed, generating $48,000 a year in access fees that had never included a cent for the man who owned the water. He made dinner. Ruth stayed through Sunday. She left Monday morning. She said she would be reachable by phone every evening and that she expected Owen to have the certified letter drafted by midweek. Harlan said he would review it when it arrived. He stood on the porch and watched her car reach the county road and turn south. Then he went inside and checked the lake level gauge he had mounted on the north shore in 1981, nominal, the Spillway, was running its passive weir discharge at 0.3 CFS, the same as it had been running for 46 years whenever the lake was at design level. He wrote it in the logbook, same as always. Owen called Nora Aldis's Monday morning at 8:40. He had worked with her on 6 matters over the previous 9 years for an administrative proceedings before the State Water Authority. 2 in county court, and his practice when engaging her was to give her the full context before stating the scope, because Nora's assessments were more useful when she understood why the data mattered and not just what data was being requested. He spent 12 minutes on the phone. He described the impoundment, the permit, the maximum release rate, the developer's 2006 grading, Harlan's logbook observations from that summer, and the developer's own hydraulic study figure of 3.1 CFS for the corridor's design capacity. He told her the permitted maximum discharge was 9.4 CFS. He told her the corridor had been in its current altered condition for 18 years, and that no independent assessment of its present capacity had been conducted since the developers' study. Nora said she could start Wednesday. Owen said that was fine. He gave her Harlan's number and told her Harlan would walk the corridor with her if she wanted a property owner's field perspective. Nora said she always wanted that. She called Harlan Tuesday evening. He answered on the second ring. She introduced herself, confirmed the site access arrangement, and asked him one question before they discussed logistics. Had he made any alterations to the spillway structure or the corridor's immediate outlet zones since the impoundment was built? He said no. The spillway was the original 1979 structure, inspected at every water authority renewal cycle. No modifications. The outlet zone, the first 50 feet of corridor below the spillway, was in the same condition it had been in since the fill season of 1980. Minus the normal accumulation of vegetation and sediment that any unmanaged drainage feature acquired. Over 4 decades, she said that was useful to know. They agreed on a 7 a.m. start. Wednesday at the spillway outlet, she arrived at 6:55. In a field truck with 2 equipment cases in the bed and a survey rod strapped to the outside of the passenger door. Harlan was already at the spillway with his logbook and a thermos. He had not been asked to bring the logbook. He brought it because it contained his 2006 measurements of the corridor's pre- and post-grading cross-section dimensions. And he thought, a hydrologist doing a current assessment would want to know what the property owner had recorded at the time of the alteration. He was correct. Nora looked at the relevant logbook entries for 4 minutes before she opened either of her equipment cases. Reading his measurements and his notation, corridor capacity reduction, monitor with the focused attention of a professional recognizing useful baseline data, she said, "You measured the cross-section compression yourself in 2006. He said he had used a theodolite from the ridge and confirmed the measurements by walking the corridor the following week with a hand level and a tape. She said, those numbers are going in the report as on a recorded baseline observations. He said that was fine. They worked the corridor from the spillway outlet south toward the Lakeview Terrace. Western boundary, 800 feet of drainage channel in its current condition, is moving through 3 distinct reaches that Nora identified within. The first 100 feet is the upper reach from the spillway to the point where the developer's grading had begun in 2006. The middle reach through the altered section, and the lower reach, approaching the development boundary where the corridor's character changed again as it entered the zone of the developer's constructed swale system. The upper reach was in good condition. The corridor's cross-section in the first 200 feet below the spillway was consistent with Harlan's 1979 permit application measurements. The natural channel geometry had been maintained by the combination of controlled releases at low flow rates in the absence of any adjacent land disturbance. Nora measured 12 cross-sections in the upper reach, recording channel width, bank height, Dalwig elevation, and estimated Manning's roughness coefficient for the vegetation and substrate. At each station, she photographed each station from both banks. She noted in her field book that the upper reach showed no significant change from the natural pre-development condition. The middle reach was different. The developer's 2006 grading had compressed the corridor's eastern bank beginning approximately 220 feet below the spillway and continuing for roughly 180 feet before the bank profile returned to something closer to its natural angle. In the compressed section, the eastern bank had been cut and recompacted at a slope of approximately 1.5 horizontal to 1 vertical, steeper than the natural bank, which Harlan's 1979 measurements showed at approximately 2.5 to 1. The steeper bank had not failed structurally in 18 years, which was a function of the root mass from the vegetation that had established on it, rather than any inherent stability of the cut slope itself. Nora noted this distinction carefully. A bank held by root mass rather than natural soil structure was not a permanent condition. It was a condition dependent on the continued health and density of the vegetation, which was in turn dependent on the moisture regime, which was in turn dependent on the flow rates the corridor experienced. The width reduction in the compressed section was measurable and consistent with Harlan's 2006 logbook estimates. where the natural channel had been approximately 14 feet wide at the bankful stage. The current channel was between 10 and 11 feet at the same reference elevation, a reduction of approximately 21% to 27% depending on the measurement. Station. The Thalweg had also migrated slightly toward the western bank in response to the eastern bank compression, creating a slight asymmetry in the channel geometry that reduced the effective hydraulic radius below what the channel width alone would suggest. Nora measured 18 cross-sections in the middle reach. She spent more time at each station than she had in the upper reach, taking multiple measurements, checking her rod readings twice, photographing from 3 angles at each station rather than 2. Halan walked behind her and did not speak. Unless she asked him something. She asked him 3 questions over the course of 2 hours in the middle reach. Where exactly the developer's equipment had been working when he observed the grading in July 2006. Whether he had noticed any bank erosion in the compressed section in the years following construction, and whether the vegetation on the eastern bank had changed character since he had begun monitoring. He answered all 3 questions precisely, citing logbook entries for the second and third. The lower reach showed a third distinct condition. Below the compressed section, the corridor widened slightly as it approached the development boundary, where the developer's constructed swale system had been graded to collect the corridor's flow and route it through a culvert under the development's western boundary road. The swale was functional, but had accumulated 18 years of sediment in its lower section, a typical finding for any unmanaged constructed drainage feature. The sediment accumulation had reduced the swale's cross-sectional area below its design dimensions, which Nora estimated from the visible grading marks on the swale banks. She measured 6 cross-sections in the lower reach and collected substrate samples at 3 stations for the sediment characterization she would include in the report. They finished the fieldwork at 3:40 Wednesday afternoon. Nora packed her equipment cases in the truck bed and stood at the tailgate writing her field notes in a bound notebook. She used the same format Harlan used. He noticed which was the format that State Water Authority engineers had used since the 1960s. Station, measurement, observation, all in permanent ink. She asked him one final question before she left. Had he ever operated the spillway at a release rate above the passive weir discharge since the development was built in 2006? He said no. She wrote that in her field notes. She said she would have a draft report to Owen by end of the following week and a sealed final by the week after. She returned Thursday and Friday for supplemental cross-section measurements in the middle reach. 3 stations she wanted to remeasure at a different time of day to account for soil moisture variation in the bank material. Harlan left the south gate unlocked both mornings and found her truck gone by the time he came down from the ridge at noon. She did not need him for the supplemental work. She had what she needed from the first day. Owen received the draft report the following Friday, read it that afternoon, and called Nora with 2 questions about her Manning's roughness coefficient selections in the compressed section. She answered both without hesitation, citing the field photographs and the substrate sample results. He said the report was solid. She said she would have the sealed final to him by Wednesday. The sealed report arrived Wednesday morning. 22 pages. Nora Aldis's professional seal and signature on the cover page. The state hydrologist certification number printed beside it. Owen read it in full before he called Ruth. The findings were precise. In the upper reach, the corridor's current practical capacity under bankful conditions was consistent with the 1979 Permeatira measurements. The natural channel geometry had been preserved. In the middle reach, the developer's 2006 grading had reduced the corridor's effective cross-section by an estimated 18% compared to the natural pre-development condition documented in Harlan's logbook and consistent with the 1979 permit application baseline. In the lower reach, the 18-year sediment accumulation in the developer's constructed swale had further reduced effective conveyance capacity below the design dimensions. Taken together across all 3 reaches, Nora's analysis calculated the corridor's current practical capacity at approximately 2.7 cubic feet per second. Under bankful conditions below the developer's own 2006 stated design figure of 3.1 CFS, and well below the permitted maximum discharge from Harlan Spillway of 9.4, divided by 2.7, 3.48 to 1. Full discharge at the permitted maximum would deliver 3.48 times the corridor's current practical capacity to the western boundary of Lakeview Terrace. Nora stated this figure in the report's summary section and accompanied it with a flow routing analysis showing the expected water surface elevation at 3 points along the corridor under full discharge conditions. The analysis was conservative. It used the measured cross-sections without any adjustment for bank failure or vegetation displacement, which meant the actual water surface under full discharge conditions would likely be higher than the modeled figures once the compressed bank section began to respond to the flow energy. She noted this in a paragraph labeled Limitations and Conservative Assumptions. Owen had read that paragraph twice. He sent the full letter draft to Ruth and Harlan the same Wednesday evening. 4 paragraphs, exactly as he had outlined on the Thursday conference call. He had written it in plain language, as instructed. No citations to specific legal authorities, no references to potential litigation, no mention of the water permit's discharge parameters or Nora's report. The letter stated what was true and requested what was reasonable and attached the documents that made both the truth and the request self-evident. Ruth read it Thursday morning and called Owen with 2 suggested changes, both in the 3rd paragraph, which addressed the unauthorized infrastructure. She wanted the language to be more precise about what was on whose property. Not just that the dock was unauthorized, that it sat within the deed boundary described in the attached conveyance document, at coordinates that could be verified against the developer's own 2006 site plan. Owen agreed to both changes. The revised draft came back Thursday afternoon. Harlan read the final version at the kitchen table Thursday evening. He read it once, slowly, beginning to end, including the 4 attachments that Owen had compiled and organized: the 1979 water permit, the deed boundary description extracted from the full conveyance document, the 2 objection letters from 2006, in 2008 with their certified mail receipts attached, and Owen's 2-page county records summary confirming that no park dedication had been filed, processed, or accepted at any point between 2005 and the present date. He read the county records summary last because it was the document that answered the only question the letter needed to answer: was there a recorded instrument? The summary said no. It had always said no. It said no in language that a county official had confirmed and that could be verified by anyone who walked to the recorder's office and pulled the index. He called Owen and said the letter was ready to send. Owen asked if he had any changes. He said no. He said it was correct. He printed the letter and the 4 attachments Friday morning at 7. Folded them into the large manila envelope he had addressed the night before, and drove to the County Road post office. He mailed it certified at 7:20, signed the receipt, and put it in his shirt pocket. He drove back to the property and parked at the farmhouse. He opened his logbook at the kitchen table and wrote the Friday date at the top of a new entry. He wrote, "Certified response to HOA mailed 7:20 a.m. Attachments, WA 1979 to 221, deed boundary description. 2006-2008 subjection letters, county records summary. No recorded instrument cited by HOA. No recorded instrument exists. Nora Aldiz's report, sealed, filed, corridor capacity, 2.7 CFS current, permit maximum, 9.4 CFS. He paused, then wrote one more line, awaiting Cora Fielding's decision. He closed the logbook and looked south through the kitchen window. The lake was flat in the morning light, the surface just catching the low angle of the early sun. The dock visible at the eastern shore as it had been visible every morning for 16 years. Nora's report was in Owen's file. The corridor numbers were in the logbook. The permit was in the fireproof box. Everything that needed to be in place was in place. Now it was Cora's turn. Cora received the certified envelope Monday afternoon, signed the receipt at the door, and carried it to her kitchen table, the same table that faced north, through the sliding glass door toward the lake. The dock visible at the eastern shore, 40 feet from her property line. She opened the envelope and removed the letter and the 4 attachments. She read the first paragraph. which stated that Voss Lake was private property under deed and water permit WA 1979 to 221. Both recorded instruments, neither of which granted the HOA any access, management, or modification rights. She read the second paragraph, which refused the demand to lower the lake level and install a ramp. Then she set the letter down and picked up her phone. She called the HOA's General Counsel, a local firm that handled the standard range of association matters, CC and R enforcement, collections, contractor disputes. The attorney who took her call listened to her summary for 4 minutes and told her the water permit and deed question was outside his firm's practice area. He said she needed a specialist in state water law or property rights litigation, and he gave her 2 referrals. Thanked him and hung up without writing the referral names down. She already had someone in mind. She had worked with a land use attorney during her commercial real estate. A man named Garrett, who had handled 2 of her more complicated development transactions, both involving disputed access rights, and both resolved, in Cora's recollection, in her favor. She called his office Monday afternoon and reached his paralegal, who said Garrett could review the matter and call back by Wednesday. Cora sent the letter and the 4 attachments by email that evening. She did not send Nora Aldis's hydraulic report because she did not know it existed. She did not send Harlan's logbook entries from 2006 because she did not know those existed either. Garrett called Wednesday at 2 in the afternoon. He had reviewed the letter and the 4 attachments over 2 days. His assessment was organized and brief. The park dedication notation in the developer's 2006 site plan was not a recorded instrument. It was a developer's annotation describing an intended future action that had not been taken. A notation in a site plan did not create a property right. A park dedication required a formal instrument signed by the property owner, acceptance by the county or municipal authority, and recording in the county's official records. None of those steps had occurred. The county records summary attached to Harlan's letter confirmed it directly. No dedication had been filed, processed, or accepted the HOA's claimed access right. To the extent it was based on the site plan notation, had no legal foundation. He paused before continuing, which Cora noticed. He said the deed boundary description attached to the letter, read against the developer's own site plan, placed the dock, the swimming area, the kayak launch within the Voss property boundary. He said that was a significant factual position for the HOA to be in. He said his recommendation was that she contact the property owner's attorney and initiate a settlement conversation before the matter escalated further. He said the HOA's exposure on the unauthorized infrastructure question, 16 years, of structures on private property, $200 annual access, fees from 240 units, was substantial. Cora asked if the HOA had a defensible position. Garrett paused. The pause lasted long enough that Cora was aware of it as a pause rather than a transition, he said. Not on the property ownership question. She asked about adverse possession. She had looked it up Monday evening. The legal theory that long-term, open, continuous use of another's property could, under certain conditions, ripen into a legal right. Garrett said adverse possession required open and hostile use, inconsistent with the owner's permission. It's continuous for the statutory period without the owner's consent and over the owner's objection. He said Harlan Voss had sent written objection, letters in 2006 and 2008, both certified, both documented in the county record. He said those letters defeated any adverse possession claim on their face. They established continuous owner objection throughout the period of use. He said the statutory period had not run, and even if it had, the objection letters would. Interrupted. Cora thanked him. She told him she would be in touch. She hung up and sat at the kitchen table looking at the lake. Through the sliding glass door for a long time, she did not call Owen Streck. She did not call the county recorder's office. She did not pull the 1979 water permit from the state's public database, which was accessible online and would have taken 11 minutes. She thought about what Garrett had told her. She thought about what retreat meant in practical terms, what it meant to the 80 lakefront cabin owners who had paid a premium for lake access, what it meant to the annual access fee structure, what it meant to property values in the development if the lake became unavailable. She had spent 20 years in commercial real estate. She knew what a waterfront amenity did to unit values, and she knew what losing one did. She also knew that in commercial real estate, the answer to an unfavorable legal opinion was not always withdrawal. Sometimes it was leverage. Sometimes it was the credible threat of protracted litigation, which cost money regardless of who was right, in which a 74-year-old widower farming 680 acres, Cologne, might prefer to avoid. She called an emergency board meeting Thursday evening. There were 3 board members, Cora, Iris Tamboli, and a third member named Paul, who had joined the board 6 months earlier after the previous treasurer resigned. The meeting was held at the development's common room, a low-ceiling space adjacent to the management office that smelled of carpet cleaner and was furnished with 6 folding chairs and a whiteboard. Cora had printed copies of Harlan's letter for each of them, without the attachments, which she had set aside. She presented her position in 12 minutes. The HOA had operated lake access for 16 years. 80 lakefront cabin owners had purchased their units with lake access as an explicit feature, documented in the marketing materials. The annual access fee had been collected from all 240 units since 2009, generating $48,000 per year in HOA revenue. Retreat acknowledging the property ownership question and initiating removal of the dock and recreational infrastructure would expose the HOA to refund claims from cabin owners, potential property value litigation from lakefront unit holders, and a structural budget shortfall from the loss of access fee revenue. She said the HOA's legal position, while not strong, on the property ownership question, was not yet tested in court. She said the HOA had a basis for asserting long-standing recreational use rights under adverse possession theory, and that asserting that theory formally in a second letter backed by outside counsel would put Harlan Voss in the position of having to litigate rather than simply having received an unfavorable legal opinion. She did not tell the board what Garrett had said about the objection letters. She did not tell them he had recommended settlement. She said he had reviewed the matter and believed the HOA had a basis to assert adverse possession. That was not precisely what Garrett had said. It was the version of what Garrett had said. That led to the conclusion Cora had already reached before she called the meeting. Paul voted yes, without significant discussion. He had been on the board for 6 months and had not reviewed the underlying property documents. Iris voted no. She did it without theater. She said no clearly and without elaboration when the vote was called, and then she asked for the meeting minutes. The minute taker, a part-time administrative assistant the HOA retained for board meetings, had her laptop open. Iris asked to review the draft minutes before the meeting closed. The minute taker turned the screen toward her. Iris read the vote record, found her no vote noted, and asked the minute taker to add a dissent statement. She dictated it herself, looking at the screen while she spoke. She said she had voted no because the board had not verified the ownership status of Voss Lake before sending the first demand letter, had not verified it after receiving Harlan Voss's certified response, was now proposing to assert a legal theory, adverse possession, that the HOA's own retained counsel had not recommended, and that Iris believed was inconsistent with the documented owner objection letters referenced in the attachments to Harlan's response letter, which she had read in full. She said she was recording her dissent because she wanted it in the permanent minutes that she had raised the ownership verification question before the first letter was sent and that no one had answered it. She asked the minute taker to read it back. The minute taker read it back. Iris confirmed it was accurate. She asked that it be dated with the meeting date and time. The minute taker added the date and time. Iris saved a screenshot of the screen on her phone before the meeting closed. Then she asked Cora directly, in the same even tone she had used. For the dissent, before the first letter went out, I asked whether anyone had checked if the lake was actually HOA property. What was your answer? Cora said she had relied on the site plan. Iris wrote that in the margin of her printed copy of the meeting agenda, dated it, and put it in her bag. The second letter went out Friday on HOA letterhead, Garrett's firm name printed in small type. In the footer as outside counsel of record, it was 2 pages. The first page asserted the HOA's long-standing recreational use rights under adverse possession theory, 16 years of open, continuous community-wide use, the HOA's position, that the use had been conducted without owner interference. The second page demanded that Harlan cease any interference with lake access, comply with the level lowering demand, and authorize the launch ramp installation within 30 days, or face legal action to establish the HOA's adverse possession claim in court. The letter did not address Harlan's 3 objection letters. It did not address the county record's summary confirming no park dedication. It did not address the deed boundary description or the water permit. It asserted the adverse possession theory and stated the 30-day deadline and left everything else unaddressed, as though the documents attached to Harlan's certified response had not arrived in an envelope that Cora had signed for on Monday. Harlan received it Saturday morning. He retrieved it from the mailbox at the end of the gravel drive, stood at the mailbox, and read both pages. He read the adverse possession language carefully, the specific claim that 16 years of open and continuous use had been conducted without owner interference. He thought about the 3 letters: the 2006 letter to the developer, the second 2006 letter, the 2008 letter to the HOA, all 3 certified, all 3 in the county record, all 3 stating plainly that the lake was private property and that no access right had been granted. The adverse possession theory required use without owner objection. The owner's objection was documented in 3 separate certified letters. Spanning 12 years, he folded the letter in half and walked back to the farmhouse, sat at the kitchen table, and called Ruth. She answered before the second ring, he said. Second letter, adverse possession theory. 30-day compliance demand, Ruth said. Now we file. He said, I know. She said she would call Owen Monday morning. He said he had already expected that. She asked how he was. He said he was fine, said the lake level was nominal in the spring. Inflow had tapered off the previous week as expected. She said she would drive up the following weekend. He said the guest room was made up. After they hung up, he sat for a moment at the kitchen table with the letter in front of him. Adverse possession. The theory required open and hostile use inconsistent with the owner's permission without the owner's consent over the owner's objection. He had 3 certified letters establishing his objection. The HOA's letter did not mention them. Whether Cora had not read his attachments carefully enough to understand their legal significance, or she had read them and chosen to proceed anyway. He opened his logbook to a new page. He wrote the Saturday date at the top. He wrote second letter received. Adverse possession theory asserted. Demand refused. 3 objection letters on record. 2006 by 2. 2008, theory unsupportable undocumented facts. He paused. Then he wrote, Water Authority notification. Pending. He closed the logbook and looked south through the kitchen window at the lake, the dock, the swim buoys, the kayak launch platform. The eastern shore sitting inside his deed boundary in the Saturday morning light, exactly where it had always been, exactly where the permit and the deed said it was. 30 days. Cora had given him 30 days. He did not need 30 days. Owen filed at 9:10 Monday morning. 44 pages, 3 tracks, 8 exhibits. The complaint named Cora personally, the HOA as an entity, and the developer's successor LLC. Track. 1 documented 16 years of unauthorized structures on Harlan's private lakebed dock. Swimming area kayak launch without easement, without compensation, without a single recorded instrument. Track 2 addressed the demand letters. Unlawful interference with a state-permitted water management facility. Track 3 was the sharpest section and the shortest. The adverse possession claim in the second letter was frivolous on its face. Defeated by 3 certified objection letters spanning 12 years, all in the county record, all predating and running through the entire period of claimed use. Exhibit H sat at the end of the exhibit stack without editorial comment. The developer's own 2006 hydraulic study showing 3.1 CFS corridor capacity, beside Nora's sealed report, showing 2.7 CFS current capacity. Outside Harlan's permitted maximum of 9.4 CFS. 3 numbers on 1 page. Owen let them speak for themselves. Certified copies reached all 3 parties before noon. Harlan submitted the Water Authority notification at 9:15 5 minutes after Owen confirmed the filing. Discharge date: Wednesday. Start time: 7 a.m. Rate: 9.4 CFS. Full permitted maximum. Duration: 14 hours. No HOA notice required. No neighbor notification required. Dennis Prout received and logged it at 9:45. Confirmed the permit current and parameters within authorization, and wrote Wednesday morning into his field schedule. Harlan wrote in his logbook that evening, complaint filed. Notification: submitted 9:15 a.m. Wednesday 7 a.m. Ruth drove up Tuesday. They spread the county. Topographic map on the kitchen table after lunch and traced the corridor south from the spillway, the bend southwest where the terrain dropped, the grade transition. Where the contours compressed, the base point where the water would lose velocity and begin to sheet. At the base of that transition, along the development's western boundary, sat 12 cabins in the southwestern cluster. Harlan pointed to the corner lot without speaking. Ruth found it in the lot index. Cora Fielding's cabin sat at the grade transition point, the lowest lot in the cluster. The first place the sheeting water would reach depth. Neither of them said anything about it. Harlan wrote the topographic observations in his logbook in precise terms and closed it. Wednesday arrived clear. Harlan was at the spillway at 6:45, walked the structure once, confirmed the gate mechanism, the outlet apron, the upper corridor. Everything nominal. At 7:02, he opened the gate to its full permitted position and wrote the time in his logbook. He carried his thermos up the Northridge path to the flat outcrop and sat down. By 9, the corridor was running, bank to bank through the upper reach. By 10:30, the compressed middle section, the one the developer's grading had narrowed, the one Nora had measured at 10 feet of functional width, was at its practical limit. By noon, the flow was exceeding the corridor's 2.7 CFS capacity, and water was beginning to sheet across the development's western boundary in a slow, broad advance. By 2 p.m., the southwestern cabin yards held 8 inches of standing water. By 2:30, Cora's backyard was under 10 inches. The deck furniture sitting in it, the water still rising at its patient. Permitted rate: she called county emergency services at 2:40-5. The dispatcher flagged it as a potential water authority matter and routed it to Dennis Prout's field unit. Dennis was already on the county road shoulder, had been since noon. Field notebook open, corridor elevation, gauge readings recorded at 30-minute intervals. He told the dispatcher the discharge was authorized under Permit WA 1979-221. Within all permitted parameters, proper notification submitted Monday morning. No water authority violation. No applicable emergency action under state permit law. The dispatcher noted it in the call record. Dennis filed his field report from his truck at 3 p.m. and uploaded it at 3-0-8. The emergency board session convened at 5 in the common room. Cora arrived first, her shoes still damp. Paul, 2 minutes later. Iris arrived exactly at 5, carrying a manila folder. She sat, opened it, and placed 2 documents on the table without a word. On the left, Harlan's 2008 letter, retrieved from the HOA's own files that afternoon. Certified mail receipt still attached to the upper corner, stating plainly that the dock was on his private property and no access right had been granted. On the right, the minute page from the previous week's board meeting, her dissent. Her recorded question about whether anyone had verified the lake's ownership. The date and timestamp in the corner. She set them side by side and folded her. Hansen looked at Cora. She said nothing. The 2 documents sat in the fluorescent light of the common room and said everything that needed saying while Cora opened her folder and began to speak. Harlan closed the spillway gate at 9 p.m. Wednesday, exactly 14 hours after he had opened it. He noted the time in his logbook, wrote the gate position sealed, and the discharge duration, and walked back up the North Ridge path in the dark with his thermos and his field notebook. The lake's surface was dropping at its normal post-discharge rate. the level gauge showing a reduction consistent with the volume released at 9.4 CFS over 14 hours. Everything within parameters, everything as the permit described. The water receded from the southwestern cabin yards through Thursday and was gone by Friday morning, leaving the debris lines that moving water always leaves, sediment arcs along. Fence posts, displaced mulch at garden borders, a thin film of silt on the lowest deck boards. The corridor itself had performed precisely as NORA's report had predicted. The compressed middle section had passed the flow at the limit of its capacity. The lower reach had sheeted across the boundary at the grade transition point, and the water had found the lowest lots in the southwestern cluster, found them with the patient indifference of hydrology, and sat in them until the discharge stopped and the grade carried it away. Cora resigned Saturday morning by email. 2 sentences. She was resigning as board president, effective immediately. She wished the community well. She sent it to the board's general inbox at 8:47 and did not send a copy to Iris or Paul. Iris read it at 9:15. She forwarded it to Owen's office with a single line. I'm assuming interim presidency at noon. Please expect my call at 2 p.m. Owen replied within 10 minutes. Confirmed. She called at 2 exactly. Owen answered and let her speak first. She stated the board's position in one sentence. No contest on any of the 3 tracks. Full settlement. What does Harlan need? Owen said he appreciated the directness. He said he would present 5 terms. The first term was the removal of all 3 unauthorized structures: the dock, the swimming area infrastructure, and the kayak launch platform from Harlan's property. Within 90 days, at the HOA's expense, with site restoration to pre-installation condition. Restoration meant the shoreline and lake bed returned to the grade and substrate condition that existed before the dock footings were set in 2008. The swim buoy anchors were placed in 2009, and the launch platform was bolted to the eastern shore. In 2011, Owen said Harlan was not interested in replacement structures or alternative access arrangements. He was interested in his shoreline returned to him clean. The second term was a recorded acknowledgement, a permanent instrument filed in the county record that Voss Lake, its lake bed, and its shoreline were Harlan's private property and that no HOA access right had ever existed. Not a settlement agreement held in a lawyer's file. A recorded instrument attached to the county's property records, visible to any future title search. Any future buyer, any future board that inherited. The questioner wanted to know what the permanent record said about it. Owen said Harlan had watched the park dedication notation sit in the developer's site plan for 18 years and generate access claims that had no legal foundation. He wanted the correct statement in the permanent record with the same durability. The incorrect implication had enjoyed. The third term involved the developer's successor, LLC. 16 years of access fees from 240 units at $200 per year, $768,000. In aggregate had been collected on the basis of access to Harlan's Lake. Without a recorded instrument and without compensation to him, the LLC's successor liability exposure for the developer's false park dedication notation was the origin of the entire chain. Owen said the LLC could join the settlement and contribute a negotiated retroactive use compensation figure, calculated from the fee revenue and adjusted for the successor entity's actual liability exposure. Or Harlan would file a separate quiet title action naming the LLC as the originating party and asking the court to make a formal finding on the 2006 permit application's misrepresentation. Owen said he expected the LLC to make a business decision quickly. The fourth term was a permanent recorded instrument confirming Harlan's full rights underwater permit, WA 19792-221, and containing the HOA's formal acknowledgement that any future spillway discharge within the permit's authorized parameters was not subject to HOA objection, complaint, or legal challenge. Owen said this term was non-negotiable. Harlan had operated a permitted water management facility on his own property for 46 years. The permit was current. Its parameters were documented. The HOA's emergency call on Wednesday had been routed to Dennis Prout, and resolved in 14 minutes. Owen wanted the HOA's acknowledgement of the permit's authority in the permanent record, so that no future board could revisit the question on the basis of ignorance of what the instrument said. The fifth term addressed the adverse possession claim directly. The second letter's assertion of long-standing recreational use, rights under adverse possession theory, an assertion made in writing, on HOA letterhead to a property owner whose 3 certified objection letters were in the county record, required a formal recorded withdrawal and a finding that Harlan's objection letters established continuous owner objection, sufficient to defeat any adverse possession theory for the entire period of the HOA's lake use. Owen said this too would be a recorded instrument. The adverse possession claim had been put in writing. Its defeat needed to be in writing in the same permanent record. Iris said she understood all 5 terms. She said she would need to confirm with the HOA's outside counsel before responding on the LLC compensation figure, but that she expected to have a response by Monday. Owen said that was fine. He called Nora Aldis's that afternoon to confirm she was available for the settlement document review. She said she was, and asked if the corridor remediation question was going to be part of the settlement. Owen said it had not yet been raised as a formal term. Nora said it needed to be. She attended the settlement review meeting Tuesday morning. Owen, Ruth, Iris, the HOAS, outside counsel, and a representative from the LLC's legal team on speaker. At the end of the table with her sealed report open in front of her and asked 2 questions when Owen reached the infrastructure removal section. The first, what was the HOA's plan for the corridor's western bank after the dock and launch platform were removed? Given that the installation and removal process would involve equipment access along the eastern shoreline. The second, who was responsible for the corridor's current capacity deficit, a deficit that predated the current dispute and would persist after the settlement instruments were signed unless someone addressed it specifically. Neither question had been in Owen's 5 terms. Both needed to be. Nora recommended a 6th term, a corridor remediation clause requiring the HOA to restore the western boundary drainage corridor to its pre-2006 grading condition within 18 months of the settlement's execution, funded entirely by the HOA, supervised by a licensed hydrologist, acceptable to both parties, with completion verified by a sealed field report before the remediation obligation was considered discharged. The pre-2006 condition was documented, Harlan's logbook measurements from the summer of 2006, taken before and after the developer's grading, provided the baseline. The remediation target was specific and measurable. The supervision requirement ensured that the work was done correctly rather than nominally. Owen looked at Iris. Iris looked at the HOA's outside counsel. Outside counsel said the term was reasonable, given the corridor's documented condition and the HOA's indirect role in its degradation through the developer's site work. The LLC's representative said nothing for a moment and said the LLC would contribute to the remediation cost at a proportional rate consistent with the developer's responsibility for the original grading. Owen added it as the 6th term and looked at Harlan, who was sitting at the far end of the table with his logbook closed in front of him. Harlan said, yes. 1 word. He had been monitoring that corridor since 2006. He had written corridor capacity reduction monitor in a logbook entry 18 years ago and had been waiting for the moment when the documentation served its purpose, a remediation clause that restored the corridor to its pre-development. Its condition was the outcome the monitoring had always been building toward. Dennis Prout called Owen Wednesday morning with a procedural note, the same note Doug Rail had made in the Greer matter. Because men who spend decades in government records develop the same instinct for incomplete files. The developer's 2006 hydraulic study was sitting in the county planning department's permit archive with its ALIS 3.1 CFS corridor capacity figure accepted without independent verification, available to be cited by any future applicant as a baseline for adjacent development drainage analysis. The figure was now documented as inaccurate by Nora's sealed report. The permit file should reflect that. Dennis said it was a 20-minute administrative correction and that the county planning department had a standard form for exactly this kind of post-approval notation, Iris said she would file it herself. She was a former environmental planner. She knew the form. She filed it Thursday morning, before the signing, in her own name, attached to the 2006 permit file as a permanent notation referencing both Nora's report and the settlement's 6th term. Harlan signed Thursday afternoon. 6 instruments in the order Owen had arranged them. The infrastructure removal and site restoration agreement, recorded ownership acknowledgement, the LLCs, retroactive use compensation, joinder, the water permit rights confirmation, the adverse, possession withdrawal and objection finding, and the corridor remediation clause. He read each signature line before he signed it, asked no questions. He had provided the instruments that made each document necessary and had reviewed every underlying record. He signed the last page at 3:51. He drove back to the property and parked at the farmhouse. He walked to the North Ridge path and climbed it slowly in the afternoon light. The way he climbed it every day, not hurrying, not pausing, the pace of a man who has walked the same ground long enough that his body knows its grade. He came out on the flat outcrop and looked south. The lake was 31 acres of still water in the late afternoon, the surface catching the sun at a low angle, the dam face holding its grade at the southern end. Maximum depth, 22 feet. At that face, a number he had calculated in 1977, confirmed in 1979 when the impoundment was complete, and verified at every permit renewal cycle since. The dock was still at the eastern shore. It would be gone in 90 days, removed at the HOA's expense, the shoreline restored. The lake bed had been his since the first fill season in 1980. It would remain his with 6 new recorded instruments confirming it in language that no future board would be able to misread or ignore. He stood on the outcrop for a while without moving. Then he went back down to the farmhouse. He opened his logbook at the kitchen table. He wrote the Thursday date. He wrote settlement signed 6 instruments, removal deadline 90 days, corridor remediation 18 months. Administrative correction filed by Iris Tamboli. He paused. Then he wrote, matter closed, lake level nominal, spillway sealed. Ruth called at 7. She asked if he was all right. He said he was fine. She asked about the cattle, the timber, the spring inflow numbers. He answered all 3. Then she asked, and he had expected she would, whether he planned to lower the lake level now that the matter was resolved. He said the lake was at exactly the level it was supposed to be. The level he had set in the first fill season in 1980, and that it had maintained ever since. The level the permit authorized and the logbooks documented in 46 years of entries. The HOA had wanted it 3 feet lower. The HOA did not get a vote on where he kept his water. Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she said she would drive up in 2 weeks. He said the guest room was made up. After they hung up, he sat at the kitchen table with the logbook open and looked at the last entry. For a moment, and he picked up the phone again and called Dennis Pruitt's office. The call went to the after-hours line. He left a message scheduling the annual water permit renewal inspection for the first week of October, same as every year, same as the year before and the year before that. Logbook open on the kitchen table. Permit documents in the fireproof box, 46 years of entries available for review. He hung up, closed the logbook, turned off the kitchen light, and went to bed. Outside, the lake held its level in the dark 31 acres. 22 feet deep at the dam face, the spillway. Sealed, the passive weir running its quiet 0.3 CFS into the corridor below. The same rate it had run every night since 1980. The same lake his permit described. The same water, on the same land, under the same recorded instrument. It had always been his. He had simply kept the records to prove it.